I think the game Lisa is already best described in its title. It's painful. It's also really weird. Lisa, aptly named the Painful RPG, was released almost a decade ago on December 15th, 2014. Made by the twisted mind of Austin Jorgensen, it has overwhelmingly positive reviews on Steam, with the game offering an experience like no other. And while its art style is like countless other RPG Maker games, it's most notably compared to Undertale. Yet other than both having pixelated art styles, they could not be more different. For instance, Undertale takes place in this vibrant underground world, while Lisa takes place in this uncaring wasteland. Undertale's characters are good and relatable people, while Lisa's world is filled with murderers, perverts, and miserable men. Undertale has a distinct combat system, giving the player the option between fighting and sparing their enemy, while in Lisa you beat dogs? Okay, look, the details aren't important. All this is just to say that Lisa is not Undertale, and the story that is conveyed is even more proof of that. And I guess the simplest way to explain Lisa's story is right on the Steam page. The miserable journey of a broken man. The story takes place in Olathe, a once healthy green landscape that was changed by this absurd supernatural event known as the White Flash, in which after a blinding flash of light filled the sky, for some unknown reason, all the women in the world just suddenly disappeared. Why this happened is only ever explained through theories and, well, very exciting dialogue. The gameplay follows Brad Armstrong, the previously mentioned broken man, in which one day he makes a discovery that will change his life forever as he finds an abandoned baby. But not just any baby, a girl, and quite possibly the only one left to exist. Brad, after finding this kid, names her Buddy, and gives himself the task of raising and protecting her at all costs, no matter the pain he must go through. And his resolve is tested when one day he comes home to find that she's been kidnapped and is somewhere in the ruthless world of Olathe. And it's through Brad's determination to find Buddy that he justifies his action throughout the story as he attempts to accomplish this self-prescribed mission of his, to protect Buddy. Despite its weird premise, it's ultimately a post-apocalyptic story with many aspects of it having been done before. I mean, the game is inspired by the novel Children of Men, which has very similar social issues to Lisa, being about a world suffering from global infertility. The dynamic between Brad and Buddy is very reminiscent of the relationship between Joel and Ellie from The Last of Us, both games about broken men and second chances. And more recently, there's even been a comic book series with almost the same premise as Lisa, but the inverse, in which the series Y the Last Man is about what would happen if all the men in the world suddenly died instead. And even though they're all completely different mediums of storytelling, a novel, a video game, and a comic book series, they were all good enough to get movie and TV show adaptations, proving that this type of story works despite being done before. And well, if it's been done before, what would make Lisa any different? And I think it comes down to presentation. Normally when you watch a story unfold, there's a certain expectation you might have. You watch a comedy, you go in with the expectation it's going to make you laugh. Watch a sad movie, you expect to cry. A horror movie, you expect it's going to scare you. A romance movie will probably make you feel lonely. And with the game called Lisa the Painful, you can only expect to feel hurt. I mean, the gameplay itself hurts. You'll fight people who will demolish you. You'll face the most intimidating of opponents that will straight up kill you. Enemies who don't seem like a threat will steamroll your entire team, and some fights are borderline unfair. So unless you're a masochist, this game on the outside really shouldn't be of any interest. However, beyond that, once you start playing and digesting the story, you'll realize there's a surprisingly complex narrative being presented through its world of Olathe. Now, I've only mentioned how Olathe is this corrupt world with evil men all having their own mischievous desires. But it's a lot harder to explain because of how bizarre Olathe really is. Firstly, to really drive home the idea that Olathe is this inhospitable place, the name of Olathe is actually just an anagram of loathe, which I think is just a cool secret. But despite how bad the place is shown to be, it's got a weird sense of humor and charm to it that I've never seen before. Now, even though Olathe is still a dark place, the game uses that to its advantage to develop its dark and ridiculous sense of humor. It has great visual comedy, pairing very well with the game's soundtrack, which does an impeccable job at setting the mood beyond comedic purposes. And the soundtrack itself is just really amazing. Some songs are downright crazy, others are just very good in generals, and some are made more impactful with the context to the story. But getting back on track, a lot of the humor I think comes from the absolute absurdity of the world. Now some jokes are crude and inappropriate at times, but in the cruel world the story takes place in, dark humor is the only real humor it can adopt. And for a game that calls itself the Painful RPG, it's honestly very goofy at times, but doesn't even really take away from the story, but rather works as a distractor from how unpleasant the game can be at times. And even a lot of the characters in Olathe find a way to breathe some form of life into the desolate world with their unique personalities. I mean, here's an example of a few. There's Terry, also known as the Hint Lord, Olan, who is an archer, Rage is a crazy wrestler, Rooster, who is a rooster, Geese Thompson, who, you guessed it, is a goose, Harvey Alabaster is a literal fish with an Uzi, he's also a lawyer, Garth is really just a pervert, Birdie an alcoholic, Dick Dickinson is a Power Ranger, Jack is a magician, Bo a musician, Buckets just has a bucket on its head. There's Nern, who is an orator and is the character that dumps all the exposition on you at the very beginning of the game, and for the love of him does not know how to shut the fuck. But then there's also Brad, the main character, the party leader basically. And Brad is, well, complicated. He's nothing like the characters I just mentioned, not some exaggerated caricature of a person nor some overly goofy character. And what makes Brad so complex of a protagonist is because he isn't just some random resident of Olathe either, but rather a character with a very real backstory and motivation. He's a character with a past that haunts him, and a past that affects his decisions throughout the story. He's a character who makes his own decisions which fit his personality, and may even make decisions that aren't morally correct at times. While one moment you may be able to fully sympathize with him, and the next you may be disgusted with what he chooses to do. And he's a character plagued by joy, an ironically named drug that works as a sort of extreme antidepressant that makes the user feel powerful, but at the cost of the drug eating away at them and deforming them into a monster. And it's a drug that plagues almost the entirety of Olathe, with just a few people fighting the influences of it. And the only real way to fully understand Brad as a character, and certain characters around him, and even the world of Olathe itself, is to just play the game. Now if you don't want to, you don't have to play the game at all. You could just look up the different endings to the game and fan theories to what anything meant. But if you're dedicated enough, or maybe even crazy enough to just play the game once, or maybe even multiple times, then I found piecing the game together myself very enjoyable, especially when playing on the harder difficulty and finding stuff I wouldn't have found on the first playthrough. But admittedly, unless you have a fond enjoyment for slower turn-based and more strategic gameplay rather than non-stop action, then playing Lisa may not be the most captivating or even enjoyable. But I stand by the fact that the story is way too interesting to let it not be known, with there being so many mysteries attached to the game that I haven't even mentioned. Like, who is the man responsible for making the drug known as joy? What about Brad's past makes him the way he is? I didn't even talk about the antagonists that make the game so much more intricate than it already is. I haven't even touched on why the game is even called Lisa in the first place. After all, the main character's name is Brad, so who is Lisa? And if you really want to know more about the game, you're just going to have to find out yourself. Even if finding out is painful, I think it's definitely worth the journey.